So on the screen up will come the slide program. Because before your whatchamacallit was in here. Like, am I going to be able to see this? Okay. Before there was a screen for the PowerPoint. Now all there is the. Oh. They're going to put me on muted. Oh, there's Nelson.
Go ahead and turn it on, and I'll make the announcement. Yeah, go ahead. Think so? Yep.
Hi, Marianne. Nice to meet you. Jerry.
See what we see. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wes Jackson, Project Coordinator for the Academic Affairs Office here at Union Institute and University. We're about ready to begin our workshop on how to better serve our student veterans. Before we start, I just want to make a couple of announcements. Please be aware that this webinar is being broadcast live across the country. We've actually got quite a few folks tuning in virtually, and it's also being recorded. So in light of that, please be patient with us as we make some minor audio and video adjustments in between the presenters to ensure the quality of this webinar production. So for those of you who are tuning in virtually, please feel free to type in questions in the GoToWebinar chat box that you'll see in your control panel. And our list of speakers, first we're going to get started with Dr. Soto, getting us kicked off, and then we will hear briefly from Dr. Terry Henderson in Florida, and then we'll transition back here to Cincinnati to hear from our union's veteran coordinator, Jerry Maples, and then finally to hear from Dr. Jessica B. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Dr. Nelson Soto.
Well, this is exciting. I'll tell you why. I think we have probably 50 to 70 folks listening in, and it's who we are at Union. We could have potentially a low-level residency where we'll have students face-to-face here in Cincinnati, and we could have another group broadcasting from Vermont potentially. We could have opportunities where we could have students taking courses all online. So this gives you a spirit just of who we are as Union, so I'm excited to share that with you. As many of you know, we started this project, the Veterans Project, through an anonymous foundation that Dr. Henderson spearheaded, and we're excited. We were awarded the monies a couple months ago, and now we have two approaches, and we're in two different phases. One being the recruitment phase, where Jerry has joined the team roughly a month ago, and is actively working with our enrollment staff to recruit students here for the Cincinnati Center. And then we also have the other phase, which is the continuous training and professional development of our faculty and staff. So today it's more focused on that faculty and staff development. And last but not least, I got a shameless plug-in because Jerry was on TV on Fox 19 here locally last Thursday. She and I were able to share a little bit about our union stories. So take a look at that link, and she became famous and popular, and the phones were ringing off the hook because of you, Jerry. So thank you. Finally, this is a pilot here in Cincinnati. Our pilot is to start off with 15 students. We want the Veterans Center, though, to be a national operation. So as we grow the pilot with the students here locally, we will continue to grow at other centers so that we can replicate and hopefully find other scholarships or other anonymous foundations, bequests, whatever we can get external funding to help with the living stipend awards for our other centers. As I shared with you before, that this is going to be an opportunity to just learn how we could serve those who served us in this grateful country. Now you'll hear from Terry, and I don't know for this group here, well, you'll see her right there. I guess I didn't even see her there, Terry, who is our Director of Grant Development. Talk a little bit more about the Veterans Program, and then we'll get into the heart and soul of the training. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us. And as Nelson had shared, the purpose today is for us to provide the very first professional development opportunity for all of us at Union to really take a look at what military awareness needs there may be for us as a group. And basically to really focus in on what it will really take to help our veteran students transition from the military to the civilian, with our education as a stepping stone. We are extremely proud to have Dr. Jessica Theed, who is the clinical psychologist for the Cincinnati Veterans Affairs with Vital, as our first esteemed partner guest to provide professional development for our initiative. Just a little bit about the grant, why we got funded. We are a very comprehensive total solution boutique style service for the veterans. One of the due diligence concerns that the foundation had was, how are we different at Union? We all know that we're very different. In doing research, we compiled the information that showed that veterans really had a very difficult challenge with going to one office for academics, another one for benefits, another one for employment. We offer a total solution. In the grant, we have a 7-step solution which encompasses career assessment through student services and success with Dr. Keene and his team, the academic support, wellness support, employment coaching, leadership seminars, and employment opportunities. So we run the gamut, which is why we have been funded. Our funding also includes not only Jerry Maples as the full-time Veteran Service Coordinator, but also the on-site resource center in Cincinnati at our site, and also an online Veterans Resource Center that we are developing as we speak. It will have its own website, and we're hoping that John Mays and his team will complete this early next week, and we will be the first to be a 3D configuration globally with our Veterans Resource Center. So we're very proud of the technology and the efforts, and so there will be a lot to come. This is the first. And at this time, I would like to introduce to you, with a very warm welcome, our new Veteran Service Coordinator, Jerry Maples, who has at this point contacted over 43 different organizations, entities in terms of enrollment opportunities and getting the word out there all about Union and what we're doing. Jerry will provide an introduction to Dr. Theed, but just a little bit about Jerry very quickly, because this is her formal welcome to Union. I thought it would be most appropriate nationally. Jerry, as I said, is our new Veteran Service Coordinator. She holds her Master's in Human Service Counseling from Liberty with a concentration in military resilience. Her BA is from Miami University. In Oxford, Ohio, with concentrations in applied sociology, family, gender, and society. She is the wife of an Army veteran and has really dedicated and devoted her life to serving vets and their families. With that, Jerry, welcome to Union.
Oh, thank you, Terry, so much. Thank you, everyone. As Terry said, thank you, Terry. As Terry said, I am Jerry Maples, the new Veterans Coordinator here at Union, and I just want to thank everybody for the warm welcome that I've received in the short time I've been here. And so thank you for that. To date, I have contacted actually Terry mentioned 43, today it's 45, different veteran military organizations throughout the community to recruit veterans and get them into Union. Some exciting news to report is about the online resource center, which Terry mentioned. It is going to be in 3D, and we do hope to have that up here very soon. And I wanted to just kind of emphasize that this online is going to complement and work in conjunction with the on-site resource center and support our veterans initiative. The online and on-site resource center is going to be the first of many throughout the Union Institute and available to veterans all over the school. So the website address for this is going to be, and you'll probably want to make note of this, is www.myunion.edu/military. And I wanted to go over and just kind of touch base on some of the resources that are going to be available on the online resource site for veterans. One thing that it's going to have a different resources available, and really the 3D format is going to make this just absolutely amazing for the veterans. One thing that we included on here is the Union mission, because we felt that was really important. And then it'll have a list of veteran services both on-site and online. And it also has a message from Dr. Henderson and myself welcoming these veterans to Union. And actually, one thing that's really important is going to have information about degrees, how to transfer credits, links to valuable information on the VA education benefits, as well as other VA links, and the Union military scholarships, which set us apart from other schools. Also, there's going to be information on the actual VA veterans, or the veteran stipend itself, and how to apply, who is eligible, the requirements, and things like that. And they will be able to also access the student services success faculty and support staff. This is really important because they will be able to connect and work in conjunction with them and know who they are and know who Dr. Henderson and myself are and what roles that we play here for them. And another important aspect of this is not only is it going to encompass their information and to reach out through the support staff, but also support throughout the community. We've provided links for them, and they're all veteran affiliated links. So support within the community is going to be really important and imperative, just as much as it is through the support here at Union. Next, I would like to make sure that we know a little bit about Dr. Thied before she comes up. It is a pleasure to introduce Dr. Jessica Thied. Jessica serves as the Cincinnati VA Veterans Integration to Academic Leadership Consultant and Liaison to 8 universities in the greater Cincinnati area. She is also the National Clinical Chair for VITAL and serves on the National Research and Advancement Committees. In addition, she has a private practice specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder and other anxiety disorders. She has presented at state and national conferences on VITAL, campus safety, military culture, and post-deployment adjustment and trauma. She also has with her today Mary Ann Plummer. She's a colleague of Dr. Thied's, and she's going to do the military culture portion. Mary Ann is a 26-year Army retired military police officer, and we're going to go ahead and welcome her. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We will get right into this, and if you have any questions, I believe we're going to hold those until the end of the program, but we would be happy to answer any questions that you might have. For those of you that don't know, there are 5 branches of the service. Most people think of it as 4. They don't add the Coast Guard in there, but there are the 5. They each have their own names that they like to be called. Most everyone will refer to service members as soldiers. That's more of the common name for them. But the Marines sometimes will get very offended. They like to be called Marines. The rest of the folks do, they do go by soldier, and they won't correct you a lot of times, but it is technically correct to refer to them as either soldiers if they're Army, Marines if they're a Marine, a sailor if they're Navy, Guardians if they're a Coast Guard, and airmen if they're in the Air Force. There are 3 different types of rank structures within the military. There is an enlisted person, there is the warrant officer, and there are commissioned officers. Your commissioned officers are what are considered the highest ranking. They have the most say most of the time. Warrant officers are the subject matter experts, and a lot of times a commissioned officer will refer to a warrant officer for technical knowledge. The warrant officer branches are more specified, and to become a warrant officer, with the exception of pilots, helicopter pilots, you have to have certain background within the career field that you choose to become a warrant officer in. And you will go to a special school for that. Enlisted folks, when they join, will go through basic training and then their skill training. Commissioned officers will go to either ROTC or an officer basic course. Excuse me. I think I'm ahead of myself on the slides. Job specialties, each branch also calls what they do within the service a different name, because we can never all be the same. So in the Army and the Marines, we call it an MOS, or Military Occupational Skills. The Marines use Marine Occupational Skills. The Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Air Force all have theirs, as you can see from the slides. A lot of times the Army will refer to their infantry soldiers as an 11 series or 11 Bravo. We do use the phonetic alphabet, so whenever you hear a military person, they will a lot of times refer to a single letter as the phonetic alphabet, and we don't use the same one, of course, as police officers, because once again, we can't all be on the same page. But most of us within the military, the 5 branches, we use the same phonetic alphabet. So you'll hear someone say 11 Bravo. We in the military police corps like to call them 11 Bang Bang instead of Bravo, but you'll get that everybody has their little idiosyncrasies that we refer to different things. A lot of your Marines are the 0311s. Those are their infantrymen. So there's a difference in how we all refer to maybe the same specific job within the different branches. Your active duty soldiers, that's a full-time job for them. And you will hear the reference that they're 24/7, 365, which means that they're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they can call an active duty soldier at any time. When I was active duty, they would call sometimes at 2 in the morning just to bring our our bags in to inspect them to make sure we were packed and ready to go at a moment's notice. So they have that opportunity with the active duty soldier that they're in control of your life, the whole thing. If you're a guard or reservist, which I later became, you're a part-time soldier. And they can still call you and they expect, they say it's typically 2 days a week, 2 days a month, 2 weeks a year. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. Honestly, anymore, that is not totally the truth in the matter. You can be called at a moment's notice. If you're National Guard, the difference between Reserve and National Guard is the Reserves are federally funded and National Guard is state funded. The state can call you and expect you to mobilize in the event of a disaster, a natural disaster within the United States. The Reserves component will never, unless it's by presidential call-up, be activated to go to a natural disaster. That is all left to the National Guard. So there's a big difference, and you will hear a lot of folks that are in the reserves. If you call them a National Guard, they'll say, no, I'm reserve. Or vice versa, the National Guard will tell you, no, I'm not a reservist, I'm National Guard. And that's one of the biggest differences, is how they're funded and what they can be called to do. So that's a big thing to keep in mind if you have someone that's in your classes that would happen to fall into one of these categories. The only branches of service that have National Guard are the Army and the Air Force. So if you have Marine or Navy, they will always be a federally funded reservist. The Army and the Air Force are the only two that won't. When a Reserve or National Guard soldier gets called up for a deployment, then when they come back from that deployment, sometimes it's hard for them to transition back into regular civilian lifestyle. Sometimes you'll see that a lot in your classes, in the store. You might see someone. It's a very big transition, and it's a transition for those coming off active duty also, because you're so used to a brotherhood, and I'll just use that in the generic sense, sisterhood, brotherhood, in that your soldiers and your other comrades in arms are your brothers and sisters, and they will do anything for you. So a lot of times transitioning back, it's very strange because folks that have never been in the military don't always have that same viewpoint. They don't understand that bond and that camaraderie. When you first go into the service, all the enlisted soldiers will go through basic training. So we have a couple pictures up there of different basic training units. Most all of the drill sergeants, and that's what they call the trainers, will have what they call the Smokey Bear hats, the big brimmed hats that they can tap you in the forehead with, and they tend to like to do that. They go through a lot of physical training. You are stripped of your individuality, and then you're built back up to work as a team. And this, when you're going through it, doesn't feel like it at all. But when you finish basic training, you have such a different outlook on life, and it makes you stronger. It teaches you teamwork, and you learn to pull those folks that maybe don't have the same strengths as you do through, and they may have other strengths that they pull you through. So it's a wonderful, horrible thing. You do get trained for combat, so that you're ready when you are called upon. And you're not only trained in combat, you're trained in self-defense. There are a lot of different things. Military culture, you learn rank structures, depending on what branch you actually join into, how long your training actually is. And most people will say that they're in the Army the day they leave for basic training, and they're now an Army soldier. The Marine Corps, you are not a Marine until you get ready to graduate. So they all have different things, and in the Marine Corps, their basic is a lot different, and they're not actually authorized to wear some of their Marine medallion until they actually finish certain portions of their training. Whereas all the other branches, you're in the Army, you're in the Air Force, and they don't have such a stringent philosophy on how they determine that you're in that branch of service. There are a lot of common myths about the military, and as a 26-year veteran, I can tell you that these are all myths. The other myth is women in combat. I've done 2 tours. I won't say that I actually was in the midst of a fighting group, but we've been bombed. You might as well be, you're a combat soldier. And combat is different for everybody, and you cannot think of combat as picking up your weapon and shooting like in the old Revolutionary War days. There's no front lines anymore. So everyone that goes and is deployed to an overseas area is technically in combat. You'll hear a lot of them say, well, I was never in combat. But if they ever got bombed, if they lived under the stress of being in that environment where you never know, then they are a combat soldier. And they're subject to PTSD, they're subject to all the traumatic incidents that happen to combat soldiers, even if no one actually ever fired their weapon right at them. So keep that in mind, because you'll hear a lot of students and veterans that say, well, I was never in combat. And you say, were you in Iraq? Well, yeah. Then you were in combat. You may not have ever been fired upon, or you may have been fired on indirectly, but you were in combat. And living with that day-to-day stress of, will someone fire at me today? Will a rocket come in? That can generate some of your PTSD and some of your other issues with hypervigilance and some of that kind of thing. So that's always something to keep in mind. I don't do well with slides, if you can't tell. I can talk. Slides aren't really me. We do go through learning different values. It just builds up the camaraderie and all of the stuff that you will learn. Punctuality, of course, is a great big thing in the military. And when people get out of the military, then sometimes they lose that punctuality. And sometimes they just have to be reminded, hey, you know what? Class starts at 8, not at 5 after, not at 8:30. And sometimes it's that little kick, hey, when you're in the military, 8 o'clock is late. Be here at 1:45. You'll be just fine. And sometimes that 1:45, they'll be on time at 8 o'clock. Each branch has their own core values, and as you can see here, they're basically the same with a little bit of difference. The Army had to go and outdo everyone by adding a whole bunch. And each branch will have their own saying that you have to memorize about, I'm a soldier, and here's my professional ethos and my warrior ethics and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes some of your soldiers or Marines, they like you to ask them about that. Sometimes, and you can pretty much judge how much culture that they want to get into and how much they want to tell you about their service by just the way they act and they interact. And sometimes, you know, it's nice for someone to say, hey, you know, what was this? I don't understand it. Feel free to ask them questions, because there's nothing a veteran likes to do more than talk about himself. We love that. No, not really. Not always. But to help you understand, and if you tell them, look, I'm trying to help understand some of this culture and I don't understand what this means, feel free to ask them. They'll be more than happy to explain versus going, heck, I didn't understand a word I was saying. So, deployment and after. I have a little bit of experience here. I was deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq each, and coming home, it's very different. Currently, these are some of the places that we are. We also are still sending troops to Kosovo, to some of your African places, countries, Horn of Africa. Don't be afraid to ask veterans, hey, where were you serving? You don't necessarily have to ask them if they've ever been shot at or if they've ever killed someone. That's a very common question from especially children. But nobody really wants to discuss that part of it. We want to tell you about the good things. As you can see, there's been a lot of soldiers and sailors, Marines, airmen deployed to the different deployment sites. If you're not familiar, Operation New Dawn took over 1 September of 2010 as the new name for Operation Iraqi Freedom. So when the combat troops pulled out, and I watched them on TV on a 52-inch screen in Iraq, I watched all the combat troops leave. We were still there for Operation New Dawn. So we are still sending troops to Iraq, in case that's another myth that's out there. The President and Congress have said that we are done in Iraq, but we are still sending troops. So there's a lot of civilians that are working over there, but there are still military troops going to Iraq. There's a lot of stressors that come from being in the military, and deployment-wise, there's wear and tear on your bodies. You're carrying a lot of extra weight that you don't normally carry, and there can also be different traumatic events that happen. And whether it's the loss of a close friend or a team member, or maybe even somebody that you knew. My daughter is also an Army veteran. Go Army. She called me when I was in Iraq. She emailed me, and she said, Mom, you need to call me. You need to call me. Her battle buddy, from AIT, who was less than an hour from me, was killed by a mortar. And she wanted to make sure I was okay. So, even though I didn't know her except to have met her when I visited my daughter at school, it affected me a lot. And I was a lot more careful for the remaining 4 months of my tour.
Oh, God. She's crying because her daughter called her.
Here are some of the medical conditions that you do have that soldiers can experience once they do come back. There are a lot more that are associated with it, but these are some of the prevalent injuries and illnesses that we have, and there's probably still stuff that we don't know about. There's a lot of things that are still coming out from Vietnam. So, yes, ma'am. Sure. The question is, to go back to one of the other slides, the multiple deployments and how that is different from in previous conflicts and whatnot. In previous conflicts, such as Vietnam, a person was drafted and they did one tour. and then they came home and they were released from their service, or maybe they stayed in the reserves or even active duty, but they weren't expected to ever go back over to Vietnam unless they volunteered. There were some case-by-case basis where they were redeployed for multiple tours without volunteering, but it didn't happen very often. Desert Storm was the same way, although it wasn't very long. There weren't multiple trips back and forth. With this new conflict, because it is an all-volunteer army, or military, sorry, I use army, and that's generic for me for military. Excuse me. Most every soldier will deploy at least one time, but most will go 2, 3, 4 times in a short period. Now, depending on the branch of service is what determines the length of tours normally. Air Force, their standard tour is 90 to 120 days. There are some Air Force folks that stay longer and do year tours, but the majority of their tours are 90 days to 120 days. Marine Corps, a lot of their tours are 6-month tours. The Army is a 12-month tour normally. So in the space of a 4 or 6 year period, you may go and be deployed 2, 3 times. They like to say that there's a stabilization period of 12 months in between each tour, but that doesn't always happen. It was 24 months, then it went back to 12 months. Honestly, I retired in 2011. I'm not sure where they're at in the stabilization period, but it fluctuates based on the needs of the military. But you will see folks that did a 4-year commitment, although those are kind of rare anymore also. A lot of your folks that go to basic, their initial enlistment contract is 5 years of active duty, anywhere 5 or 6 years. So in that 5 or 6 years, or even 4 years, they go for 6 months, they're home for 12, they go for 6, they're home for 12. You can count as well as the rest on how many deployments that actually makes. And that's the stress of, leaving your family. In my opinion, it's easier to go for 12 months. Let me just knock it out, come home, I'll be home for 12 months or 24 months, go again for 12 months. Because it's not that constant coming and going and leaving your family, and that is very stressful, whether you're a reservist or active duty. So. There are a lot of psychological concerns that are related to military service. If you're not familiar with the last two, it's post-traumatic stress disorder and also military sexual trauma. And when you think of military sexual trauma, think of it as male and female, because it happens across the board. And it can be male on male, male on female, female on male. I don't think I've ever heard of female on female, but I'm sure it can happen. Nothing against the men.
It really keeps you grounded,
It does. It keeps you grounded.
As you can see, 18.5% of returning soldiers are diagnosed with.
I know every time I think I've got it.
That's just an example of how I receive emails about your story that you're sharing with us, and I'm being yelled at by a faculty member. Cannot believe that you did not provide a glass of water to our speaker.
They actually have bottles of water up here for us. No, you know what? 26 years in the military, I have no problems drinking out of a bottle. Thank you so much. 18.5% of your returning soldiers meet the criteria for PTSD and depression. Now, not all of them will come in and be diagnosed. And that's probably the biggest thing that you will see. Most of us don't want to admit to the fact that we have a problem. And my first deployment, my daughter was 16 when I got home, and she said, Mom, you have anger management issues. And my response was, step a little closer. Let me show you what anger management can do. I'll manage that anger. So be aware that most of them don't want to hear that they have a problem, but sometimes we also need that little kick that says, hey, you know, you're not really the same. Especially if you have a student that you had, he or she deploys, comes back, and you will always notice some change. But please remember that not only have this military folks changed, but you've changed too over the year, or however long they're gone. And so most people say, well, that service member has changed. But they don't take into consideration the changes that you've made in your life also, or that their spouse or family members have made. In the family situation, in the family dynamic, it's very different because someone else has taken over all the jobs and the chores that they did before they left. So what might be your job as taking out the trash has now been delegated to one of the kids because you're gone for a year and that trash can't sit there and build up. Well, when you come home, that child is so used to doing the trash that mom or dad is no longer required to do that. And that's a tough thing because when we come home, we want to jump in and pretend like we were never gone. But life has moved on. And so then we get upset or we get frustrated. And so our spouses or our children or our friends say, well, you've changed. You're not the same. Well, you've changed too. And so the whole world has moved on, but we've all moved on. It's not just an individual change. So that's kind of important to remember. And you'll see that even if you didn't know them prior to them deploying, you'll kind of see that because sometimes we bring it out in forms of aggression or anger or frustration. There are a lot of overlapping symptoms with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. And traumatic brain injury is our signature wound of this war conflict. It's when they've gotten their noggins knocked, or maybe they were just in the blast zone and they've gotten their bell rung is another term for it, but just the blast itself, they didn't get hit, but the force of the blast and the air that comes back at them will sometimes jostle the brain, and it causes a lot of different issues for them depending on how severe that can be. It can come from a bump on the head, but it can also come just from being in that blast radius. Transitioning back, we didn't, but I kind of covered this earlier. There's a lot of different things that you go through. There's stages, and when you first come home, we call that the honeymoon, because you're home, you can get McDonald's, you can get Burger King, you can get it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where you couldn't get it before. And I can remember thinking, I'm getting French fries, real American French fries when I get home. It took me 6 months to get to McDonald's, because once you come home, you realize it's really not as important as what you thought it was going to be, and you really didn't miss it. But there's a lot of stuff we really look forward to coming home. And then we get home, and it's great for the first 6 months, and then it's like, oh, this isn't as exciting as we thought it was going to be. And we miss a lot of the structure that goes into having been deployed or having been in the military, because there's someone there, no matter how high in rank you are, telling you what to do, when to do it. You know exactly what clothes you're going to put on in the morning. You're either going to PT and you're putting on your PT uniform, or you're putting on your uniform. There's no decision in the array of colors that we all have in our closet. And so there are a lot of things like that that are so much easier when you're in the military. And I still struggle with that. It's like, oh, if I was still in the military, I could just put on my uniform and I wouldn't have to worry about it. But there's a lot of that stuff that now you have to make those decisions. And even though it sounds very simple, sometimes can be a very big chore. The other thing coming from a combat zone that people don't think about is the color overload. And the first time I went into a store when I first came home, and I'm looking around and there's all this color. And over there it's brown, or it's dusty brown, or you might see a little green. But there's no oranges, there's no, even the folks that are there, they don't wear bright colors. They're all subdued. So looking around, I was just like, oh, I gotta go. There's too much color here. Just being in the store and shopping. So those are some of the things that people feel when they come back that we don't necessarily think about there being that much, but it can be just a visual thing as well as feelings and different things like that. Some of the things that we do when we're overseas and some of the things that we feel and learn, it's a lot different than coming back here. It's just like driving down the road and seeing a bag of trash on the side of the road. In Iraq, that means it could be a landmine or an IED. In the United States, it means somebody was careless and was a litter bug. But when you drive and you're used to driving overseas and you avoid that area, you're driving down 3 lanes of interstate and you're in the left lane and all of a sudden you cut over to the right lane. People are beeping at you and you're going, dude, I can't drive by that bag of trash. Or I can't drive by where they've dug up on the side of the road because it might explode. Folks here don't understand that. And so that's one of the many challenges coming from a battlefield that you have to reintegrate into, going under overpasses or under vice versa. You know, you don't know if that bridge is still going to be there when you get to the end of it, or if somebody behind you, one of your buddies, could be the one that doesn't make it all the way across the bridge. So those are a lot of things that it takes a little bit of readjustment for us to get back into the habit of, oh, you're back in the United States. After I came back from Afghanistan, the hardest thing for me to do was to walk on grass because of all the landmines that are in Afghanistan, and you never walked in an off the path. You didn't walk off the path because the Soviets bombed, put landmines in to keep the Afghanis in, the Russians. Everybody landmines, so they're one of the top 3 countries for landmines. And they would clear our main drag-on post once a month, and there was always at least one landmine that would come up. They've just gotten pushed down with the weather and the wind and gotten buried, and then they'll float to the top. So to walk on grass was a challenge. I had to tell myself, oh, you're back in the States. You can do this. There's no landmines here. But the first time I went to step off that concrete, I was like, are they kidding? I can't believe they sent me this way. So some of the challenges, you'll see some of those things, maybe not that drastic, and maybe not that they'll tell you, because it took a long time before I told anyone I couldn't walk in grass. And now you get to have Dr. Jessica Feed, and she will continue this. If you have any more questions about culture, though, please feel free to let me know at the end of the course. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary Ann. I'm really pleased that you have been able to join me here today, and I always think it's a wonderful opportunity when I can partner with a colleague from the VA who actually has military experience. I myself do not. Everything that I have learned about the folks that I serve has come from my experience serving those individuals as a psychologist. So even sitting here today and listening to you talk about the slides that I often go over when I'm doing these events, I learned something new. It's the very personal experiences that have been shared with me over the years that have helped me better understand and therefore able to help, especially the student veterans. Okay, so I'm going to move our PowerPoint along here. You will find as I'm sharing some information in these next group of slides that I might piggyback off of something that Marianne has talked about. I really do welcome any questions along the way. We are reserving some time at the end for a Q&A. So hopefully folks in the national audience and you here today that are physically with us are keeping track of questions that you have, and we can address all of those. But just to give you an idea of some of the data or statistics behind the student veteran population, which is what the Vital Initiative focuses on, I have some stats here that compare our military, our former veterans, or excuse me, our former service members, i.e. veterans, to non-traditional and traditional students. And as you can see from this chart, our former service folks look a lot like our non-traditional student population. And from what I'm learning about Union, you all are very familiar with working with a non-traditional student population. So some of your students fall into that older age range. A very small percentage of our student veterans actually match the traditional ages of typical college students. So as you can imagine, a lot of the factors that non-traditional students bring to a campus or an academic setting, those issues are being brought as well by our student veteran population. So many of them have families, jobs, and a number of other responsibilities. There we go. Okay. So one of the things that I have noticed over the years in doing this particular program, which is a VA program that supports student veterans, is I've seen a shift in the percentage of our population in terms of where they are at in their academic process. And I've really seen the number of students that are going on to graduate school increase. We anticipate that that will continue to grow. So the shift from just the four-year schools and moving into grad school is something that we truly welcome, we want for our veteran population. And as many of them are learning to manage their GI benefits and taking advantage of wonderful opportunities like here at Union, they're finding more room to be able to go on and pursue those additional degrees. The other chart on this slide indicates the female versus male population. And one of the things that is really notable, given the number of females in the military as a whole, is the fact that they are overrepresented in academia. And I really think that that has, and this is just anecdotal, we don't have a lot of hard data on our student veteran population, but I really think that our female veterans are ready to get back in and pick up where they left off when they've been in school, and ready to pursue help that is offered to them in a way that is different sometimes than our male population. So, something that's notable. All right. As you can see from this next slide, there's a tremendous increase from 2008 through 2012 in the number of folks taking advantage of the post 9/11 GI benefit. And so I have not the time or the ability in terms of my knowledge to go in depth today about the different GI benefits, because there are a lot of them. But what I will point out is prior to 2009, when the post 9/11 bill was introduced, the benefits were, quite frankly, not as good. And Marianne, you might have anything to add into that when we get to the Q&A, but it's different with this newest benefit, as there's a living stipend and a book stipend that's been provided. So we've seen a larger number of folks take advantage of their benefits returning from service. And we continue to see that grow. So I think this is a pretty dramatic depiction of that overall shift. All right. Another slide going over some myths, which I think Marianne did a good job of addressing some general myths about the military. And some of these are consistent with myths about student veterans, but there's some additional ones that I have certainly heard in doing this job and traveling to campuses. I've had a lot of folks approach me and assume every student veteran has PTSD or TBI, traumatic brain injury, which is certainly not the case. I've had a lot of folks make statements to me about, well, you know, how are they going to do in academia? I mean, they probably were of lower intelligence to begin with, having gone into the military. And certainly, those two things are absolutely not true. We have lots of evidence to show that we've got countless service members or former service members who have equal or higher IQs to the general population. They just made different choices. So another thing that I point out here are the top two bullet points are statements that I have heard myself about our veteran population, and that I have had veterans share with me that they have been told themselves. And these are, of course, absolutely not true and very hurtful to our veterans. And I think a lot of times people just are not thoughtful in making comments like that. And it's not necessarily due to wanting to hurt a particular individual, but sometimes it comes from a political stance or a moral or religious viewpoint, and they don't think about how that might impact the individual. All right, so as a result of a lot of what Marianne had shared about the military training and culture, we have, I think, a group of folks who bring considerable strength to their academic, and I keep holding my bottle of water here because I really want to take a drink. Thank you, Marianne. And some of the, I think, unique characteristics that the military produces, I should say, or helps foster it through the training and camaraderie are really leadership, a distinct leadership ability that I see and I hear faculty and staff talk about kind of express itself in classes and on campus. So folks taking initiative, being the first one to volunteer to do something in a classroom setting like a group project, or rallying the folks and saying, okay, let's get this done when people are procrastinating. So that can be a real positive in the classroom setting. And again, also the collaborative kind of team member approach, the flexibility and adaptability. I've heard a lot of people, and even Marianne talked about the structure and rigidity of the military. But surprisingly enough to some folks, that structure and rigidity or routine serves a purpose in service, but all of that fosters a great deal of adaptability and being able to readily change, take on new assignments and tasks at the last minute. And all of these are, I think, fantastic skill sets to have as a student. All right, and then the last point I make, being invested in the community. Some of the schools that I work with have helped the student veteran population target community projects, volunteer service, just different kinds of things along those lines that have helped pool the student veterans together on a particular campus. So as you begin to develop your program here and think about ways to help that camaraderie grow, think about community involvement, as many are interested and dedicated. All right. So Marianne went through some slides on psychological and medical issues that our veterans are challenged with. And just to go back to some of those medical factors, I have seen in my work with our population from the day I came into our primary integrated care clinic, a lot of chronic pain. And what was particularly striking to me was sitting across from a very young veteran and observing what appeared to be sort of arthritic responses or references to my bad knees, my bad back, my bad shoulders. experiences that I had had in working with a geriatric population. And I learned very quickly that that wasn't just the 1 or 2 veterans that I was seeing in my initial days in clinic, but rather it was a kind of chronic syndrome because of the types of deployments that our OEF, OIF folks have been through. So Marianne had mentioned the really heavy packs, folks going in and out of vehicles that are really low and require a particular stance or body posturing to get in and out of, and just that daily wear and tear. So how does that relate to academic barriers? Folks deal with pain, and as a result of dealing with pain, we have folks that have medical appointments and have PT appointments, have surgeries that are scheduled and pending and need to be rescheduled sometimes, and therefore follow-up appointments or reassessments are required. At times, the physical aspects can produce difficulty with attention and concentration, and that's just the physical pain aspect. So how does that happen? If anybody's had any kind of ongoing pain, whether it's following a surgery or an injury, you don't concentrate as well as you normally do. You're easily distracted and drawn back to that. So it can impact concentration, focus in that way, as can some of the other conditions that our folks deal with. So if a person is dealing with tinnitus or tinnitus, which is ringing of the ears, if you imagine a constant ringing sound in your ear, it becomes really difficult to pay attention, concentrate, hear your professor talking. Sleep problems, those are very, very common with our veterans, and many folks have a diagnosis of insomnia or have just general sleep difficulty. So I know when I've had a bad night's sleep and my 4.5-year-old has kept me up, I am not on it like I normally am. And so if that's a chronic issue, we definitely see an impact in daily functioning. Some of the other kind of medical pieces that can come out to impact their academic functioning can be light sensitivity. And kind of going back to the pain or musculoskeletal issues, standing for long periods. So our veterans will talk about how certain lighting in the classrooms or labs where they have to stand up for a long time have a negative effect. And I always like to talk with faculty and staff to really help create an awareness around that, because as Marianne mentioned, our folks might not come to you and say, I'm having a problem. But if you know who your veterans are, and this might be a little different with online, but being very aware when you're interacting face-to-face, they're not saying something to you, but you're noticing, like they look uncomfortable. Or he might need a seat, she might need a seat. Being cognizant of that can be supportive and help them better approach the task or the meeting, whatever it is that you're engaged in with them. So just keep that in mind. Other issues that come up to create difficulty in achieving academic success can be stuff that's just outside of the school, the classroom, and has to do with life, like holding down a job or having children. And we certainly have families where more than one person in the family is a service member. And so that can get really tricky as well. I mentioned as my last bullet point here the developmental and gender issues. And I already alluded to the fact that our female veterans tend to be in a little bit of a different place at times than our male veterans when it comes to help seeking or comes to getting back into the civilian world. Again, that's a generalization, but because there are always exceptions, but for the most part, men do struggle more with help seeking than do women. And when we look at younger men, we have we have lots of data, and I certainly have anecdotal experience that shows when we have a young veteran, they're still sometimes in that mindset of being invincible or not feeling like they can ask for help because there's a stigma around it, and maybe their superiors haven't okayed that. And there's a lot around stigma that we haven't even gotten into, which kind of leads me to make this comment. Keep in mind, today is kind of an introduction and an overview. There are a lot of details and depth to probably every slide that you've been introduced to. And I could actually probably put up a slide and have an hour conversation about each thing on that slide. So if you see something that's really interesting to you, that you're very curious about, not only in the Q&A, but you are welcome to send us an email. And anything that I can't answer, I will send along to Mary Ann, and we have a whole team of people that can help answer those questions. But there's a lot of depth to this, and we're just kind of giving you an overview. All right. So I like Adam Sandler. This slide always makes me laugh. But this is a good, I think, example of what I've heard veterans feel like sometimes sitting in the classroom. It's like, okay, I am so out of place here. And we have a lot of our veterans that have been very drawn to online academics because of this sense of not quite fitting in. And so I think there is just a wonderful element that Union adds with the opportunities here. Alrighty. So I'm going to give you a little more in-depth about what it is that the Vital Initiative does. You've met Mary Ann, you've met me, we've told you a lot of different pieces of information about the population. Now I'm going to get into the Vital Initiative a bit, and as you learn about the program and hopefully get to know me over time, we are a resource for you. And that literally means you have a question, shoot me an email. You need to talk about something, set up a time, I'll come talk with you. We really want to be your link to the VA and have an open door. So we see that as the best approach to supporting our population. Instead of being siloed, open up the door and bring the VA out into the community. And that's really our new initiative. So Vital is a collaborative. It is a national VHA collaborative between the academic institutions that have decided or desired to partner with us and the VA Medical Center. And we really put it as our primary goal that we are working with each academic institution individually to decrease barriers. So whatever the institution or the folks involved see as being problematic for their veteran population, we'll meet you where you're at and figure out the best way to help implement changes. And so that's exactly what I'm doing with Jerry and Terry, which I think is a fantastic partnership. I'm looking forward to it. All right. We have core components in this program. And so those core components consist of direct clinical service, care coordination, outreach, education, and research. And the way that this works is always a very veteran-centric model. When I provide direct service, that is direct service to the student veteran on campus in the form of psychotherapy and or consultations. So sometimes student veterans just need to meet with me one time. They have some things to talk with me about. They want me to connect them with someone or something, and it's very short term. Other folks are having psychological, psychiatric issues, and they want to meet for an ongoing period of time. So I can actually physically come to the veteran and provide the services that we offer at the VA, which is really a brand new thing for the VA. And so far we're seeing a very positive response to this open door. In terms of care coordination, we recognize as a VA that every veteran may not want to be served by the VA. We own that. And every veteran has the right to communicate that with us, and we have then, I feel, an obligation to help them find the services that they're looking for. Sometimes those services happen on campus. So depending on the campus, depending on the school, sometimes folks can meet with an advisor, a psychologist, counselor on campus, and those needs are met. Sometimes folks need to be referred out into the community. So we work with the veteran and the academic institution to make sure and coordinate the best care possible. And there are times when it is certainly us. They choose to see us at the VA. They want to come to the VA. So Vital coordinates within the VA system and all of the organizations that we are a part of. So we have what is called the Vet Center, and the Vet Center is a mental health component of the Veterans Health Administration that is located off-site from the main medical facility. And ours happens to be on 8th Street. Yes. I see it visually, but it's on 8th Street downtown, and it's just mental health. So folks don't have to go through the big VA system. They can park easily, get out, go see their mental health provider. There are some caveats for who qualifies in terms of going to those vet centers, and I think it has loosened a little bit, but it's mostly combat veterans, and there's a loosening around family eligibility. Is that correct, Marianne? She's giving me a nod. Yes, and military sexual trauma. So it's really nice for folks who say, I do want mental health care, I would love to go through the VA, but I don't want to go to that big building. So we do a lot of referrals to the vet center. In terms of outreach, we, and Marianne is a big piece of our outreach team at the Cincinnati VA Medical Center. We go out into the community and we have a mobile unit, which is similar to like the mammogram vans or buses, or the blood drive vans or buses, about that size. It's a fully equipped medical unit, and we will take that into various settings and provide services to our veterans. Sometimes we just enroll new veterans. Sometimes we have various medical and mental health providers, and we'll do flu shots or initial examinations to get the folks started into our system. And we have most certainly brought the medical unit onto campuses that we partner with. So we may have our medical van here at some point in the near future. I hope we do. And then we'll open that to the community as well, so that veterans who live around the area where the van is can come as well. The education and research component. This right now is an example of that piece of Vital. What we really hope to do is open up a dialogue and help folks feel like we are accessible, and folks can ask questions about our veterans, ask questions about best practices for providing services and support. And in terms of those best practices, we are doing a lot to collect data and to really have some strong evidence for what works and what doesn't work. And that's a process. And this is a very interesting time for our veteran population, because never before have we engaged with academia in the way that we are now. So this is a whole new body of research. All righty. Moving along. Okay. So just very quickly to show you the structure of where we are in the big VA system. When we think about VA, there is the big central VA office out of Washington, D.C. That's like the mothership. And underneath there are 3 main branches: our benefits branch, our health branch, and our national cemetery branch. And underneath the 3 branches are 2 particular programs that are involved in academia. On the healthcare side, straight down the middle in the purple, is the Vital Initiative. The one over next to that in the blue is the Vet Success on Campus program. Some of you may have heard of that, you may not have. That program is a Veterans Benefits Administration program, and the folks that work that program are, just like me, VA employees that have partnered with an academic institution, but their role is different. They're not focused on the health care or the mental health care. They are focused on making the benefits process easier, because boy, can it be messy and frustrating. So those folks are on campus to assist certifying officials, registrars, advisors, and to make sure that everything flows smoothly and the veterans get their benefit. We're very fortunate here in Cincinnati because we have a VSOC person that I'm able to collaborate with right around the corner on UC's campus. And oftentimes when I go out and do talks, she will come along with me. Her name is Jill Cochran. And she's a fantastic resource to have so close by, because even though she's not at your school, when I have a question that is very benefit specific, I can literally pick up the phone and say, Jill, I am working with this union student and this is the question that just got asked of me. And she can get into a whole nother set of databases that I can't get into, because we like to keep things very separate inside the VA. But it's been incredibly helpful, and as I talk with my counterparts nationally, there are 24 vital folks like me. As I talk with them, the people that are fortunate, as I am, to have a VSOC person nearby say the same thing, right? This is awesome. They should have paired us. But it's not the way the grant funding worked out. So this is a map showing where we are. And as I said, 24 sites nationally. The VSOC sites, if I put them up here, we would see a lot more dots. There are 94 of those folks. We have a very collaborative national team, and we share information and resources. So when one site learns a best practice, then we can say, that works for your school of 5,000 veterans, I'm going to implement that at one of my schools. And we've been involved in the program for different periods of time. So I am one of the original programs, and as such, I have more schools that I have partnered with, and most recently adding Union, which is fantastic because I am able to, several years in, now share things that I've learned from working with Miami University, UC, Northern Kentucky. There's 7 others. Mount St. Joe's included, and Xavier as well. And that gives you all a benefit, I think, because we're not just starting up and figuring things out. But again, great resource to have as a national collaborative, because I learn something new all of the time. And for your particular situation with Union, being a national school, we have the ability to connect and to do outreach in a different way, which we're going to explore. We're a new partnership, but we're going to explore how we can expand that, since I've got colleagues throughout the nation. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth, and I'm going to check my time here. We're doing great. On the model itself, and I won't spend a lot of time reading slide by slide because I've already shared a lot of information with the initial core component slide. But there are different aspects to the direct clinical service beyond psychotherapy that we do, and some of that includes case management, which is not therapy, but rather keeping track of issues that clients are dealing with and connecting them with resources. We also are able to do groups and informal groups, formal groups, couples and family therapy. So as your program begins to grow at Union, there might be a noticed need or desire to have a group meeting with veterans. And this is certainly something that we're prepared to do. In terms of psychotherapy, I haven't mentioned much about it, and I'll be very brief, but the VA operates according to an evidence-based therapy model. And if anybody is not aware of what that means, most of the psychotherapies that are recommended for treatment have been tested through some sort of research protocol and have been determined to be more effective than something else. So there is efficacy to the treatment. And the evidence-based treatments, there's a really long list of them, but we use those as frontline treatments. So if we're treating PTSD, the frontline treatments would be cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure, and I did not put those in order of preference. Right now, they're looking to be pretty equal in terms of how effective they are, so it's more of a veteran choice. In terms of depression, we use ACT, and acceptance and commitment therapy. We use interpersonal therapy, and all of these have gone through pretty rigorous research trials. We use motivational interviewing as well. Now, in addition, and I won't continue with the list, but in addition to those evidence-based therapies, we have a very veteran-centric approach where we don't apply the therapy because we've learned over the years that that isn't effective, but rather we ask the veteran, what do you need and how can we meet you where you're at? And so if at the VA, if you're not going through a research protocol, you do have a lot of choice as a veteran in terms of the kind of treatment that you get. Lessons learned, a really important piece. And I'm able to offer those evidence-based therapies and general supportive therapy on campus. I'm certified in most of them. Okay, so the care coordination piece, I've already talked about this, so I'll just highlight the top bullet point. In terms of referrals within the VA, we have a lot of folks that need to have specialty care. They need to be referred for physical therapy, occupational therapy. They might need to be seen in our traumatic brain injury polytrauma clinic. So when I'm out on campus, I'm doing an outreach event, or I'm working independently with a student, I might end up making that referral beyond myself and getting them connected at the main facility for that additional care. And so I also encourage folks, as you're working with veterans, if you're aware of something, somebody keeps talking to you about their problems with sleep. They happen to mention they've really done nothing about it. We do have a sleep study, sleep clinic, we have treatments for sleep disorders, and so you can contact me and say, hey, I've got this guy or gal that's really struggling with sleep issues, and we would initiate that specialty referral. All right. The outreach piece, I want to talk just a little bit more about the mobile unit component, and you can ask me questions in detail later when Mary Ann is mic'd and we're doing the Q&A. But this is a big piece of what Mary Ann does, and the mobile unit, I think, has been a pretty powerful tool in helping us to find veterans that haven't necessarily been able or willing to come to the VA and seek help. So by taking that mobile van into the community and spending a day, and they go all over the place. They go to job fairs, they go to county fairs, they go to Kroger parking lots, and find veterans that may otherwise not actually drive to the medical center. And we have, I know you know the numbers, but we have really enrolled new veterans at, I think, an impressive rate since really getting that mobile unit out and about. And not every VA has that kind of resource, so we're really fortunate here. All right, I'm going to mention just a couple things on the research piece that are of a lot of interest to me, and hopefully you all will, in your way, become a part of. We are down the road, so it's in the very early phase. We're looking at asking schools for feedback about how Vital has really impacted the veterans on your campus or impacted you. And there are a range of things we're looking at. So maybe it's an awareness piece, an accessibility piece. How easy was it to connect with the VA compared to in the past? How much do you now know about our system? So we're in the planning phases for data collection, because this will be a national study. But it's certainly something as new partners that Union hopefully will be able to participate in. So that'll be coming down the road. And the biggest piece that I think is most important, that I will close this slide out with, is retention. So I don't know if anybody happened to see the most recent, and I say most recent because it was earlier this week or the end of last week, article that came out. I think it was the Huffington Post, that basically said our student veterans are dropping out at unbelievable rates and not completing. And the Student Veterans of America, the SVA, which is a chapter, kind of like, they don't like to be called like a fraternity, but it sort of parallels that. They are on campuses. They had just done a study released in 2012, which is a wonderful study, and I think I reference it, the Million Records Project, which you all should take a look at, where they found the exact opposite evidence. So there are very few, very few, I mean, I think probably 10 at the most, actual studies that have been published at this point that look at how our veterans are doing academically. And we have now seen some very contradictory evidence. So we Vital, aren't hearing dropout and retention problems on our campuses. And now granted, we serve about 110 campuses across the nation between the 24 programs. We're not hearing this as an issue. But again, just as of the end of last week or the beginning of this week, seeing that published, that this is a glaring problem, it reinforces what's been on our research list for a while, is to really measuring that retention. There are some challenges to that. And for anybody that's in certifying or registrar's office, you know that oftentimes folks will utilize families' GI benefits. So it's not always the veteran that's using the benefit. And to date, most schools nationally have only tracked who's used the GI benefit itself. They're not tracking the individual veteran. So the data has been skewed. And I will, as academians, I will put that out there just as food for thought, because it's a really interesting topic and something that's been inaccurately assessed so far, that we hope that Union can be a part of getting a real solid read on over the next couple of years. All right, so I've got some points up here that I think can be helpful as you consider your role in working with student veterans and kind of what happens on your campus. And I'm not going to read these slides verbatim. You all are intelligent folks and can do so yourself. But I think it's important to think about, what does your environment look like? What resources do you have? Are you being sensitive to or aware of various factors that might be of notice to veterans, like a flag? Is it in good condition? Is it well kept? I've been to campuses where, one, there wasn't any kind of flag or anything representing the armed forces, but I've been to ones where it looked like nobody had done anything with it for years, and it really looked tattered. Veterans notice these things. So that makes a statement about your school. It makes a statement about your faculty, your staff, how important something like that is. Some of the other things to keep in mind are about the relationship. You're dealing with a population who has a lot of life experience. And so I've had one-on-one discussions with a number of professors in particular that have found it challenging at times to relate to veterans, because they're used to approaching the class from a top down, and I know more than you, and though clearly as a PhD in that field, they probably do know more than that particular topic. But the way of relating to the veteran becomes really important, because they have a whole different set of experiences that are equally valid. So just keeping that communication and relationship piece in mind. This is probably one of those few pieces of data that actually has been published, but we know that when we look at the general population of students, there are some factors that contribute to good relationships and productivity or effective learning. And so some of those things directly apply to our student veteran population as well. But we also want to keep in mind that there are very distinct differences that I think require an added level of awareness or sensitivity. And the more you interact with veterans, the more, I think, intuitive it becomes. So if you're feeling like, well, I just don't know what that means, or how am I going to understand or know? Most people don't start out knowing anything. I had to learn as I went along, and it came from repeated interactions and asking questions. And so that's where I go with my next couple slides, I do believe, is they're coming along, is some questions that you can ask, and just some things to think about. Before we get there, I was jumping ahead of myself. This kind of encompasses all of what I've talked about being a collaborative between the VA and the academic institution. Really finding a way as a school to think about your policies and procedures to recognize when student veterans are having difficulty. And this is where, in my role as a vital coordinator, I'm able to work with Jerry and really help shape some of those policies and procedures, because we've got great examples over the last 4 years from a lot of schools that trial and error figured out what worked and what didn't. So I see a lot of room for positive growth in that regard. The one piece that I think is really, I'm excited to see how Jerry and Terry kind of build this, the peer mentor piece. We're seeing evidence, because there are some smaller studies that are in process that are looking at peer mentoring programs. We're seeing a lot of evidence that it really can impact academic outcome. So as I was talking with these two great ladies about the program that they're developing here, that was a big piece of the conversation when Terry and I first met, is how important that peer mentoring is. And so we're seeing it has an impact, and I know that as that piece is shaped here at Union, it will as well. Okay. So here's the kind of questions or things to think about when you're working with your student veteran population. If you have a personal connection to military service or experience, being able to share that or display that is definitely a great way to start a conversation. So when I mean share or display, if you have a picture, maybe you yourself were in service, or somebody that you're close to is in service, and you have a picture on your desk, somewhere that's visible for the veteran to see, that can stimulate conversation. We might say, oh, your husband served, or you were in the service, or is that your son or daughter? And it's a way then to begin that connection. So it's really, really simple. Some folks that don't have that kind of picture to display will have a little flag, and I don't have any of these today. I have a table out there full of stuff, and I don't have this little flag, but you can find them lots of places. A small little flag that you can put in your pen or pencil holder. That, believe it or not, makes a bold statement. And I've seen that simple display start a number of conversations. And it's relatively inexpensive. So another thing, and Mary Ann had addressed this punctuality piece. I know I am a person who at times has struggled with being places on time. And I tell you what, I don't really struggle with that now. In the past I did. But I learned really quickly that that is not okay when you're working with veterans. And though our veterans are human beings too, and may lose some of that punctuality, or they themselves be late for different reasons, they value it highly. So if you say we are meeting at 3 o'clock, and then you come strolling up to the office space that you're going to meet with a coffee in your hand, that says something. It says whatever I was doing before was much more important in this meeting. And so I'm not saying you can't be human and you can't be late to a meeting ever, but just being cognizant of how important that is because of how important and relevant it was during service. That's something that will go a long way in building rapport. I mentioned being direct and concise. Our folks want to get to the point. And so that's a skill. For me, I like to talk, and I sometimes like to weave in a lot of information. But I've learned when I'm working one-on-one with a veteran, I get to the point. I try to be very clear and succinct as I'm conveying a message. And then, once that's conveyed, the point is understood, that kind of builds a degree of respect. Like, they can tell me what it is they need to tell me. And for those of you that have had that experience, you'll understand what I'm saying. It's a little hard to articulate, but it becomes very crucial in establishing the validity of what it is that you're talking about. So sometimes that can be a little challenging in academia, especially if you're teaching a class that requires kind of critical or free thinking, or it can be a little abstract in terms of what the requirements are. So I've witnessed a number of our folks get frustrated saying, why can't they just tell me what they want from this assignment? It's a little too vague. So, the guys and gals that I have served over the last few years have certainly owned a need to be a little bit more flexible and relearn some of that adaptability for academia, but it is a two-way street. So when you're first getting to know someone or they're a new student, kind of thinking about being clear and then introducing some of that creative, free thinking as you go along. All right. The last bullet point I will mention is the idea of getting to know who is on your campus. And I didn't ask, which I usually do, but I think part of why I didn't ask is because we have a national audience and I can't see hands. But anybody in the room a veteran? Okay. And so being aware where you work and where you interact, who has had a service experience, can be really helpful as new veterans come on campus to just connect them. You can say, oh, well, Joe, he served, I'm not sure when, or maybe you do know when, but sharing that detail could help build that community. So pay attention. All righty. Mary Ann provided a lot of detail around military culture, which you all will have access to. There are also at the end of the slides web links to great resources that will help you better understand our folks and tap you into some things that are beneficial for them, so that if you need to send somebody some information, you can say, oh, check out this website. And I've provided all of that toward the end of the slide deck. But in thinking about what you've learned today about military culture, what you've learned about experiences when deployed, these are just some questions that you can ask, and you can ask them very open-ended, and it can generate a lot of discussion. And without even saying much of anything yourself, you can learn a great deal about how that veteran feels about their military service. And that's one of those myths that was listed. Every veteran doesn't have a positive emotional connection to the military or psychological connection to the military. They just don't. And I think many people assume you served, you must be really patriotic, it must be like, the thing for you. But that's not the case. So listening as you ask some of these questions can really key you into how they feel about it. Okay. So I'm going to check our time, and we have about 20 minutes, and I'm thinking this would be a great time to kind of shift over to the open questions. The last slides, again, you all will have access to all of this, are a lot of great resources. So at this point, we would love to hear your questions, your comments, and anything that comes up is welcome. Welcome topic. Thank you.
Sure that everybody can hear the questions that we've had, and if you've got more, go ahead and write them in the question box in the GoToWebinar little control panel. I want to thank all of our presenters here. This has been a really engaging afternoon. One of the questions that we had early on is, what is the result of adrenaline surges, and then what is the result
like to say that I think that there might be two answers to this question, and so I would love to piggyback off of what you're going to share.
There's a lot of adrenaline, and sometimes soldiers are called adrenaline junkies because you do get off on some of that race and the rush. The letdown afterwards is huge. And for some folks that don't actually experience the adrenaline rush, sometimes that's a huge letdown and they're upset and angry. It can cause some anger issues for them that they never got to experience some of that adrenaline that other people talk about. So.
And I think what I wanted to add to that is that we do have evidence as we look at magnetic resonance imaging and various other resources that measure physiological response and changes in the brain, that repeated surges of adrenaline can change the way our neurochemical functioning works. And so the question kind of had this piece around the psychological component. There is, I think, a physiological piece to it, where those adrenaline surges, that sort of physiological arousal, is wired into someone after repeated exposures to that surge. And it's a lot easier then to experience that rush of adrenaline than somebody who doesn't have that repeated exposure. On the psychological side of it, it can be a disappointment, like Marianne mentioned, to not have that feeling. And it's been described to me many, many times as kind of feeling like I'm never going to live like that again, like that rush of life, even though life was at risk. And so lots of disappointment around not feeling those surges. It's almost twofold: not feeling them from experiences in day-to-day life, and then easily having them triggered. So I'm going to wrap this back around to something Marianne had mentioned about the colors and having sensory overload when she walked into that store. There's a lot of sensory experiences that our folks have when they're deployed that can be easily triggered when they come back stateside, such as sight, sound, smells, and those are some of the things that can cause that surge of adrenaline again. So that might not necessarily be a good adrenaline surge, and it can produce a psychological response such as feeling threatened, at risk, worried, having an arousal, like increased heart rate, difficulty breathing. Those things aren't necessarily pleasant. Whereas maybe getting on a motorcycle and driving 110 miles, 120 miles an hour, that's a positive adrenaline rush that our folks see. So hopefully that combined answered that question.
This question is for you next. What are the plans for connecting personally with each academic center here?
Well, Jessica had mentioned peer-to-peer mentorship, and that is one thing that we're definitely going to do. I had 2 students in this week and was talking with them about different things. One thing that we're doing is we're taking an intake on each student, and basically that's just going to provide us things that we want to know about them. What are their things that they like to do? What do they do for fun? What are their hobbies? Things like that. So we're going to have a lot of group activities with these students. We want to have one thing that I suggested was we have peer workshops where we gather them together, because there is that commonality, and I want them to get to know each other and just know that they are there for support. So definitely a lot of group activities, social activities. Want to try to get them out into the community, because they have that need and desire, like Jessica
question from the Sacramento Center regarding the grant to veterans to help them cover half. Because again, the grant will cover half of their housing. Neil wanted. This is from Neil Meyer. He wanted to know how the grant. Do we know how the grant will affect the taxes?
I believe that when you have Chapter 33 benefits, that is not taxable, so that will have no impact whatsoever. I think. I'm not sure, but they'll have to follow up with Ed because I'm not sure about that in financial aid. Did I say that wrong, Ed? Okay.
Chapter 33 benefits are not taxable. However, housing stipends are taxable.
Okay.
And if they come from the university, only scholarships for those for tuition are not taxable. So this is a scholarship for those living expense that is taxable.
Okay.
They will get a 1099 so parents can.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that. So.
Okay,
Yeah. Ed, can you send that out?
Sure, and it probably wouldn't hurt to explain because we're not a traditional.
Did you want to come up here and
Yeah.
so that they can hear you on the conference?
Usually I'm loud enough to The way the grant will work with us is that the students who qualify will receive a matching portion to the housing stipend from the VA. The housing stipend for colleges like ours that are not traditional seat time is 50% of the full housing allowance. So the VA will only give them 50%. This grant is going to match that for 1 year, and that's roughly $7,500 for 1 year, or $2,500 per semester for the 3 semesters for the undergraduates.
Thank you, Ed.
One of the questions addresses the wrong questions. And wanted to know, what are the wrong questions not to ask?
The wrong thing to do, just to start off, is don't ask who your veterans are in front of the whole class. Most of them don't want to be called out, so that's one of the biggest things. But some of the wrong questions are, have you shot anyone? Have you ever fired a weapon at someone? You know, have you been shot? You can ask them if they've been injured, but that's a total different connotation than have you been shot or shot at. What are some of the other steps?
I'm going to take pause and think a moment because a lot of it is around asking questions about potential acts of violence, assault and injury. So being very careful around those questions is important. But most of our veterans are pretty open to talking about did you serve and where did you serve. So if you're careful not to say things about have you been shot, have you killed someone, you're going to avoid the big no-nos. That really is off-putting and can generate a lot of feelings for someone that can be difficult to manage in the moment. And Marianne made an important comment about not asking who the veterans are in front of the whole class. The way I recommend people do it is by acknowledging that there might be veterans in the room, or might be veterans taking the course. So, and saying, if there are any veterans, please know that I'm accessible and open if you need any assistance. So you're saying, I'm aware you could be part of my cohort and I'm happy to help you, but you're not saying, hey, raise your hand, identify yourself. That empowers them to make that choice. So in terms of the wrong questions, personal questions about assault and injury and life-threatening situations, allow that to evolve after you've gotten to know the veteran. And that might come, if you ask if they've been injured, maybe there's something visible. How were you injured? right? That question happens a lot if it's something very visible. You'll know in the way they respond how much depth they want to provide around that. And then using good judgment, do I probe further, do I let it go with that? So hopefully that's helpful. Everybody's different.
The next question, how does the lack of employment opportunities affect returning veterans?
Go ahead.
I'll just jump in and say, I think that has been a driving factor in our folks returning to academia. So there are a lot of individuals who have expressed, maybe I didn't want to go to college, or I wasn't planning on doing this right now, but I'm not finding positions that I am interested in. I'm not being able to utilize the skills that I utilized when I was in service. And so I am going back to school.
And a lot of times I think a veteran feels that their life experience, you can't put that bachelor's degree on a job application, and there's a lot of places that want to see that degree versus the life experience. So they find themselves back in school because of that. They don't have those initials after their name, and so they're here just to get those initials, even though a lot of times they feel they can already do what they're majoring in, but the military doesn't give them those initials.
And I just wanted to add to that too. Transition after the military is very, very hard because a lot of times they don't know where to apply the military skills that they got during their service. So meeting up with employers like Hero to Hire, places like that that are accessible to them, they can help them do that, and they can guide them to school, and then school can enhance that military experience that they got and prepare them better.
The next question is, do veterans who are drafted and those who volunteer exhibit the same levels and types of adjustment issues?
I don't think they do. They do and they don't. It's kind of a two-folded thing. Those folks that got drafted, a lot of them didn't want to be in the military, and some would join the military just so they didn't get drafted and they got a little more choice. But those that actually got drafted, I think a lot of them, that wasn't their first career choice. Whereas now it's an all-volunteer Army, and there's nothing, I'm not saying anything bad about draftees at all, because there's a lot of wonderful people that found that the military really helped. That wasn't their initial career choice, but they've really gained a lot of knowledge from it. But now being an all-volunteer Army, it's different because they can, when you enlist, you know that that's one of the things that you could potentially have to do. When Desert Storm first started up, you heard a lot of folks that said, and even with this war, I only enlisted for the school benefits. I'm here for the college money. And it's like, yeah, but you signed your name that said, I agree to go to war. So you got some of those early on, I think, that weren't really, the transition back was harder because they were bitter about having to go when that's not really what they thought they were signing up for.
I'll just add in, I completely agree with that, and I am not aware of any empirical studies that have looked at the differences with adjustment or PTSD for drafted versus volunteer. Those may be out there, I've not seen any. But in terms of what Marianne mentioned about folks early on during these particular recent service eras, I've worked with a number of veterans who flat out told me, I enlisted simply for the school money so that I could go to college and get it paid for, and I never imagined that I would be in a combat zone in Iraq, and a lot of anger and resentment. So there are a wide range of responses. That's a wonderful question. Yeah, so the question was, what are some of the potential challenges or barriers to implementing the Vital Initiative program in an academic institution like Union, where you're online and you're a national program? And I am the first of among my 24 colleagues to actually do this. So we were just chatting on our national call, and none of the other schools are set up quite like you. So it will be a learning experience. And I see some of the challenges as perhaps there are folks that are identified as needing or wanting psychotherapy that are on a campus elsewhere, and it's taking a little bit of time to connect them with the right person. What I'm hoping will happen is that there will be a close proximity to folks that I know on the national team, whether it's through Vital or VSOC, where I can actually do a referral based on, I know that this is a good clinician that would work well with you. We're a very intimate team, and I can do that locally. If it's not going to be me, I can say, you know, Dr. Williams would be a great fit for you. I can make a statement like that and make that connection. So those kinds of challenges may come up when I look at the psychotherapy component. In terms of the consultation piece, I think that that can be easily addressed through our technology and the resources that we have to connect just like we are today. In terms of the education piece, the same thing. Care coordination could be a little bit tricky as I'm not intimately familiar with the other VA systems, but it will be a learning process. So hopefully it will work out smoothly and we won't miss any needs.
We have one more question here from the chat box, and it's, are there significant differences among veterans of different demographic groups that educators should be aware of when dealing with different students?
And actually, we all might have a little piece of this to add, because I see Jerry nodding. You know, what first comes to mind for me is really thinking about the female veteran population. And I've had a lot of different experiences working with my female veterans than I have with my male veterans, and a lot of that being what I've talked about already, which is the help seeking. Being able to say, this is happening to me, this is going on, I need assistance at school, and kind of seeking it out in a way that maybe has taken a long time to develop in my relationship with my male veterans. There's definitely sometimes a difference when it comes to age. So the younger veterans, again, having that kind of piece of feeling invincible, or like, you know, I don't need VA benefits. I'm fine. I don't need to get service connected for anything. I'm not going to need surgery. And that's because you're in your 20s and you're not thinking about the fact that you're having really terrible pain in that knee from the injury during your service. And it might actually need to be repaired when you're 35. You're just thinking about medical issues, family issues differently. So definitely the age factor.
Can I just add
Yeah,
something to that? The first time someone from the VA came to me and said, are you enrolled? I said, no, the VA is for old people. And a lot of younger veterans feel that way. The VA is for old people, and I'm not old enough to go there. So keep that in mind. If you have someone that you see that's hurting that may or may not be connected to the VA, because it took 5 years of convincing before the guy finally got me to walk into the VA. So you'll see that, and I was in my 40s. So think of a 20-year-old. They don't want anything to do with the VA. They think it's an older generation. Once they come in and they find that there are a lot of their peers there, they're a lot more open to it. But that first initial thought of the VA is something that your grandfather should be using. So.
excellent question. And I will say that our national director is a veteran himself and continues in the Guard. I had to pause there for a second. He is a guardsman. And we have a number of our rival team members who are veterans as well. And in each of our respective academic institutions, we make it a point to partner with as many veterans as we can find to participate in our focus groups, in our university or academic committees, and to do outreach. And so a perfect example is the fact that Mary Ann is here today. I am not a veteran. And again, all of my experiences come from the work that I have done and from my clinical training. But when I had a surprising opportunity for Mary Ann to come along this morning, I was like, yes, this makes sense. And my national colleagues do the same thing. Some of them are very fortunate to be paired with a veteran who's like their support person that does everything kind of with them on those academic campuses. And so they are the lead in most of the presentations or the groups because we know that that connection works. So thank you.
Put our folks out on the, they couldn't hear. They
They
didn't.
didn't hear your question. So
You were asking about whether or not they were organized boards.
Just to be clear what the question was, and my apologies, I'm forgetting that there are folks that can't always hear the questions from the audience. But it was about the role of veterans themselves in the Vital Initiative program. So as I was saying, we do have a number of veterans that help develop the program and that lead the program throughout the nation.
I think that's all the questions, unless there was anything else. We do want to have a last word from Terry, Dr. Terry Henderson, who wanted to just address some of these things from her perspective, since she's done so much to get this program started and Terry's really kicked it off. So, Mary, are we able to go ahead and transition?
Okay, are we good? You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just wanted to extend my deepest thanks to all of you. This has just been incredible, most emotional, and most, I guess I want to say, in terms of Union's initiative, what an incredible opportunity. We as social justice leaders want an opportunity to assist with your efforts and to have you be with us as partners. One of the things I did want to share was that one of the most important things in terms of recruiting, supporting academically, socially, and emotionally is also the employment opportunities. We are reaching out through the efforts of Jessica and additional partners to the military-friendly employers nationally. And our goal is not only to recruit, support, retain, graduate, but it's all about a job. And so, you know, we want to help each and every veteran that we have enrolled to help them with their lifetime goals and their success in life and their families. It's about the total solution, and that's what we hope to offer. So thank you all very much for today, and just wanted to smile at you from my heart and say thank you for everything that you do. Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to your partnership.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact Jerry Maples. Jessica, we're actually going to put your email up there as well. So if you want to know more
Reach
about
out.
that. Yep. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to supporting our veterans.
I only say that because we have to figure out where to park.
Oh.
40 feet.
Oh my God.
Like advertise. Yeah, it's not small.
Be there.
We're talking 40 feet of
Yeah.
first parking space.
And she's asking a mobile unit question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I was just
we were
answering
just
another
talking
one.
about that.
Because she said, I want the mobile unit here. And I said, it's 40 feet.
Yeah, when I was volunteering up at Kings Island, when they
Yep.
have the military weekends, because I'm part of Pull My Heart.
Okay.
So you spoke to our group before, yeah. So when I saw your name, it's like, it's so familiar to me.
I haven't been up there in years.
Wondering if you,
Ed, thanks for saving me.